Today is October 23rd, 2022. I'm going to talk about the situation in and around Ukraine. As always, let's take a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map. I like to refer to it because I want to give Ukraine benefit of the doubt. And if this is even what Ukraine is saying, it is very hard to be skeptical of the information that I'm going to present to you. If we look at the map, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, there are blackouts across the country, and there are continued drone and missile strikes. This has gone on for well over a week now. Russia is targeting and successfully destroying Ukraine's critical infrastructure. They are eliminating Ukraine's power supply, and this is most likely not in retaliation for the attack on the Crimean bridge. That retaliation is over with. This seems to be part of a much more long-term campaign that most likely will be followed by a very large ground offensive, but only time will tell. If we look at the front lines down around Kherson, this is where Ukraine launched its first and largest offensive, and then after that, many waves of offensives since then. They have gained a little bit of territory here to the north, but not because they're out fighting Russian forces. Russian forces are falling back to avoid taking heavy losses and to avoid being encircled. As Ukraine sends these waves in, they are losing brigades worth of trained men and heavy weapons that they really have no way of practically replacing. If we zoom out of southern Ukraine and now part of Russia, and we look at the front line in the Donbas region, you see these red rifles. This is where Ukraine claims it is repelling Russian attacks. But by admitting they're repelling Russian attacks, they admit that Russia is on the attack. This means that whatever forward momentum Ukraine had during its Kharkov offensive, that has ended. It has ground into positional fighting. That doesn't mean that Ukraine is incapable of making further gains, but they're not going to be doing it at the pace that they had been during the Kharkov offensive. And now Russia is also pushing back and gaining territory, very incrementally, but gaining territory nonetheless, especially around Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a crucial node in Ukrainian defenses. These are defenses that have been built up over the course of 7 to 8 years. Losing Bakhmut would put a huge hole in Ukraine's main defense line in its east. And their inability to protect this essential city, in their inability to hold on to it, tells you that they have overstretched their forces by concentrating them around Kherson for their offensive, by expending them in Kherson and in Kharkov. They have left other crucial parts of their defenses underdefended. And it is manifesting itself on the battlefield by Ukraine retreating in the city. They are giving up territory in the city, and they will eventually give up the city itself. And this is at a time where Russia is mobilizing 300,000 additional troops and equipment. They are in the process of deploying it, but they have not fully deployed it yet. So if this is the situation right now for Ukraine, it is only going to get worse. Ukraine does not have 100,000, 200,000 or 300,000 trained troops coming in to reinforce their positions. Russia does. Regarding these drone and missile strikes, there is an article from the BBC. Ukraine war, Russia airstrikes target more power facilities. So this is a campaign. This was not a handful of strikes to temporarily knock out the power. This is a campaign to permanently cripple Ukraine's crucial infrastructure. The BBC says airstrikes have hit critical infrastructure in central and western Ukraine as Russia continues to target the country's energy grid. Sites to the south and west of Kyiv have been struck and power cuts have been reported across the country. The BBC goes on and says on Friday, Mr. Zelensky accused Russia of planting mines at a hydroelectric dam in the Kherson region of southern Ukraine. which is under the control of Moscow's forces and also considered part of Russia by Moscow. He said that if Kakhkovka hydropower plant was destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people would be in danger of flooding. Russia has denied planning to blow up the dam and said Ukraine was firing missiles at it. Now, destroying this dam and flooding the Dnieper River would compromise multiple river crossings over the Dnieper established by Russia to resupply its forces on the west bank of the Dnieper, including in the city of Kherson itself, a designated target of Ukraine. They want to take this city, and by flooding the river and compromising these river crossings, they would compromise Russia's ability to resupply those forces defending that city. It is very obvious that Russia has absolutely nothing to gain by blowing up this dam, and Ukraine has everything to gain by destroying it. Here's something else you might not know. The dam itself is also a road and rail bridge, which Russia is using to resupply its forces on the west bank of the Dnieper. And it's interesting that Kyiv is talking about mines, naval mines, that they would float down the river and blow up the dam. They're claiming that Russia is going to use mines to blow up the dam. It's very illuminating that Ukraine would accuse Russia of blowing up the dam precisely the way Ukraine would actually have to do it if they wanted it destroyed. So keep that in mind. A lot of people are skeptical about Russia losing Kherson city. And I will say that Russian forces around Kherson are formidable. They are reinforcing their positions around Kherson city. They are digging in, they are building fortifications. They really would like to keep the city. It would be a huge political blow if they lost it. On the other hand, Russia is thinking about the long war here. They're not thinking about only short term. Ukraine is only thinking short term. They are not even thinking past the winter. Russia is thinking very long term. They're thinking about when these 300,000 additional troops and equipment are in place, what are they going to do then? If it means giving up Kherson city to save a large number of Russian troops and heavy equipment, then I think they will make that decision. They are already evacuating the civilian population. There is no doubt in their mind that when their mobilization is fully deployed along the front lines, that they can get Kherson city back and much more. But that is only if something goes wrong. Russia plans on defending the city. If something goes wrong and they are faced with losing large numbers of troops and equipment or withdrawing, I do believe they will make the decision to withdraw. It is not the end of the world. It is a temporary setback. As I have said over and over again, this is not a turning point for Ukraine. They are throwing everything they have left at Russian defenses, and they are trading their entire army for these territorial gains, temporary territorial gains. At that, Russia will get this territory back. And this brings me to my next article. This is a very interesting article. It's from 1945, and it's titled, "Could Russia try to take Kyiv again? The war in Ukraine is far from over." And this is by retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. And there are a lot of very interesting insights in this article. And this is a pro-Ukrainian article. This is an article written about what Ukraine needs to do to win, essentially, or to at least not lose. This is what retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis says. Zelensky is pressing his forces as early as next week to try to seize Kherson while Russian forces are still weak and before sizable reinforcements arrive. He's talking about the 300,000 mobilized troops on their way. But Ukraine faces a bigger potential threat than merely more Russian formations coming to the relief of its defenders in Kherson. Continues. Russia long ago destroyed the bulk of Ukraine's ability to produce military equipment and ammunition. Kyiv is wholly dependent on a non-stop stream of supplies from the West, and that goes for everything, from small arms ammunition to artillery rounds to the guns firing this ammunition. The greatest threat to Ukraine's ability to wage war, therefore, is the security of supply routes from their western borders to marshalling locations in the interior of the country. If Putin recognizes this vulnerability, he may mass his forces through Belarus again, but bypass Kyiv completely and strike towards Ukraine's western borders. Now, of course, Russia is concentrating at least some forces in Belarus for something that appears to be a major next move. We just don't know what it is. Davis continues, the single greatest vulnerability for Ukraine is a Russian drive from Belarus through Lutsk and Lvov. The vast majority of Ukraine troops are presently massed in the country's southeast, about to fall on Kherson, the far east defending in Donbas, and in the northeast pressing the Russians in the Kyiv region. There are almost no sizable formations in the western regions. It goes on. With the land route from Poland cut off, there would be virtually no way for Ukraine to sustain its war effort for more than a few months. The only other route the West could use to get war material to the Ukrainian armed forces would be over the Carpathian Mountains along the Slovak and Romanian borders, an extremely difficult and restrictive path. Ukrainian forces in the Donbas would soon run out of artillery, ammunition, and rockets for its HIMARS systems, and it would no longer be able to get replacements for any of its armor. Russia, meanwhile, would have an uninterrupted supply line to its troops and would be able to relentlessly hammer away along all fronts. It would then only be a matter of time before the sheer weight of Russian weaponry and troop concentrations, combined with a dwindling ammunition supply on Ukraine's side, could bleed Zelensky's forces dry and force Ukraine to face the choice between seeking a negotiated settlement or suffer outright defeat. And you have to remember, even with these supply lines wide open, the equipment, the ammunition, the weapons the U.S. and its allies are sending Ukraine are dwindling. They're running out of things that can practically be sent and used by Ukraine. Then Davis says something that I have been saying all along. He says, whether the Ukrainian armed forces take Kherson in the coming weeks or whether Russia holds it won't have much of an impact once Putin's mobilized formations are in position and ready to launch their attacks. I just said that, didn't I? It doesn't matter what Ukraine does with this offensive. Ultimately, it does not matter. He continues, in the best of circumstances for Zelensky is going to face tremendous challenges. The successes he has won since the beginning of September have come at great cost. This is what I've been saying all along. In terms of both personnel and equipment, it takes time to replenish losses and train new troops, but Ukraine will require not simply to replace losses, but to grow the number of troops considerably to meet the expected Russian attacks. Again, attacks that are being reinforced with 300,000 additional troops. And these are not conscripts yanked off the street, as the Western media suggests. These are men with a previous military background being called back to duty. And then throughout the article, his suggestions to Ukraine is that they should call off these offensives, or they should put a time limit on it, and if they cannot succeed, call it off. Reinforce these areas that are vulnerable to Russian attack, because the Russian attack is coming. Russia is going to now make their move. And at this point, and even he is admitting this, Ukraine is overextended. And if Russia decides to cut off supply lines from the West to the rest of Ukraine by moving into Western Ukraine, there's nothing Ukraine can do to stop that at this point. They need to build up reserves in the West. This is what he's saying, but build them up with what? I don't know, but that's what he says. Now, isn't it interesting that as retired Lieutenant Colonel Davis writes this, talking about the possibility of a Russian incursion into Western Ukraine, cutting off Western supply lines, that we're hearing all of this talk now about U.S. troops training along the Ukrainian border in Romania, but there's also troops in Poland, and they're talking about the possibility of crossing over into Ukraine and joining in the fighting. And I saw this CBS News article. It's very alarming. This is a major escalation. The U.S. Army's 101st Airborne is practicing for war with Russia just miles from Ukraine's border. Now, if you look on a map at where this particular military unit is training is right across the Ukrainian border with Romania, right across from the Odesa region. And I have said many, many times that if it looks like Ukraine is about to collapse, the West will want to rush in, create a buffer zone in Western Ukraine to preserve what's left there, and possibly also take Odesa to prevent whatever is left of Ukraine from becoming landlocked. Now we have the U.S. Army's 101st training right over the border, possibly to do exactly that. This is what CBS News says. The U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division has been deployed to Europe for the first time in almost 80 years amid soaring tensions between Russia and the American-led NATO military alliance. The light infantry unit, nicknamed the Screaming Eagles, is trained to deploy on any battlefield in the world within hours, ready to fight. For more than 7 months, Russian troops have tried to push along the Black Sea coast into Kherson region, aiming to capture the key Ukrainian port cities of Mykolaiv and Odesa. Their goal is to cut off all Ukrainian access to the sea, leaving the country and its military forces landlocked. That threat, so close to NATO territory in Romania, is why one of America's most elite air assault divisions has been sent in with some heavy weapons or heavy equipment. We're ready to defend every inch of NATO soil, Lubas told CBS News. We bring a unique capability with our air assault capability. We're a light infantry force, but again, we bring that mobility with us for our aircraft and air assaults. Now, here's the most important part. The Screaming Eagles commanders told CBS News repeatedly that they are always ready to fight tonight. And while they're there to defend NATO territory, if the fighting escalates or there's an attack on NATO, they're fully prepared to cross the border into Ukraine. But if the fighting escalates, this is what I don't understand. I can understand if Russia attacked NATO territory, why there would be a retaliation. Russia is not going to attack NATO territory, not unless they're attacked first by NATO. And so what are they talking about if fighting escalates? Well, what does that mean? And I really do honestly believe this is a light infantry unit. They would have no chance rushing in just to fight the Russians. They would not ever do that on their own. But what they would do, because they are so mobile, they would roll into Odesa, create a buffer zone before Russian forces reach there, before Russia could react. And this is most likely what I think they're doing. We saw U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin speaking with his Russian counterpart, General Sergei Shoigu. And this is something that they do regularly in regards to Syria. And Syria is a place where Russia got involved militarily. The U.S. is occupying half of the country, the eastern half, and they are in constant communication to prevent actual direct fighting between Russian and American forces. There has been some close calls, but they have more or less averted a major conflict. The U.S. has set the precedent of creating these type of buffer zones to carve out and maintain territory for their proxies. They also feel they have experience deconflicting the situation with Russia. They may be tempted to do this if they believe Ukrainian forces are about to collapse or be pushed back irreversibly, which is most likely the case because the United States and its allies have run out of heavy weapons and ammunition to send Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are massively overstretched. Even pro-Ukrainian commentators like Lieutenant Colonel Davis is pointing this out, how critical the situation is, how this is far from a turning point in favor of Ukraine and an extremely dangerous point in time for Ukraine. So this is just something to keep a really close eye on it. I have been saying for months that the U.S. would be tempted to create a buffer zone. They have all of the pieces necessary in place to do so. I think it's interesting that they're talking about cutting Western supply lines to the rest of Ukraine. I mean, this is why you would create a buffer zone. So that would never be possible without Russia having to fight directly against US and other NATO forces. I'll keep an eye on this and everything else. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Please check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram. I update that several times a day. All of my YouTube videos are backed up automatically on Rumble and Odyssey, and they will show up there in a day or two. Subtitles on my YouTube videos will also show up in a day or two. Thank you for your patience. They're auto-generated. I have no control over when they actually show up. In the video description below, there will be all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I don't monetize my YouTube channel. If you see an ad, please skip it because it's not helping me at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, or through PayPal. To everyone who has been helping out month to month through one-time donations, or even if you're just helping share my work. I greatly appreciate all of that. I could not do this without that support. So again, thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.